Okay, get this. What if I told you that a massive century-long war, a war fought over just two ancient Greek words, not only defined God for billions of people, but completely, and I mean completely changed the history of Western art forever? Sounds wild, right? So how on earth did an obscure theological argument become one of the most important intellectual battles in history? The stakes were, believe it or not, sky high, and the answer connects some seriously abstract philosophy to, you guessed it, the very paint on a canvas.
All right, so here was the core problem for the early church. Their scriptures talked about God in three really distinct ways. You've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But at the same time, they insisted there was only one God. So how can God be both three and one? It was a genuine divine identity crisis.
Now, people tried to solve this puzzle, and their first attempts, well, they fell flat. First, you had Arianism. This idea basically said the Son was a lesser created being, not fully God. But that got shot down pretty quick. I mean, if Jesus isn't fully divine, how could he save humanity? Then you had Sabellianism on the other extreme. This theory claimed God was just one person who wore different masks. But that didn't feel right either. It made the whole relationship between the Father and Son seem like a divine puppet show. So one idea separated them way too much, and the other just mushed them all together. Both were dead ends.
This all leads us to the famous Council of Nicaea back in 325 AD. It was supposed to settle everything, but instead it kicked off a legitimate war over two words. And it all started with a single, incredibly confusing sentence that would fuel decades of bitter, bitter conflict. The first word is ousia. The best way to think about it is as the fundamental essence of a thing. It's shared, universal wetness. You know, just like the ousia of humanity is what all of us humans share, the divine ousia was understood as the single divine nature, the very stuff of God, if you will. And the second word is hypostasis. This is basically the opposite. It's not the general what, it's the specific who. It's the concrete individual reality. So not humanity in general, but a particular human. Not the substance, but the unique person who exists in that substance.
And this, right here, is where it all went completely off the rails. In its final statement, the Council of Nicaea condemned anyone who said the Son had a different hypostasis or ousia. They used them as if they were synonyms, as if they meant the same thing. That one little word, or, was like lighting the fuse on a powder keg. For the next 50 years, the church just descended into absolute chaos. So who fixed this mess? Well, the solution came from a trio of brilliant thinkers we now call the Cappadocian Fathers. And one guy in particular, Gregory of Nyssa, came up with the breakthrough that finally brought some clarity to all the madness. Gregory's analogy was just so simple and so smart. He said, okay, first, just think of the general concept. Human, right? That abstract shared nature. That's the okisha. Now, think of a specific individual. Let's say Peter. That concrete, unique person with his own story, his own identity, that's the hypostasis. See? Peter isn't separate from humanity. He's a particular instance of it. And this led to the solution that stuck. God is one ousia, a single divine essence that exists as three distinct hypostases, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. This was huge. It meant they weren't three separate gods, but they also weren't just three masks for one God. They were three unique, co-equal persons who shared the exact same divine nature. The puzzle was solved. But you know how it is, solving one big problem just reveals a new one. The scriptures call the Son the perfect image of the Father. So if the Son is a distinct hypostasis, a totally unique person, how can he also be a perfect image? Isn't an image just a copy, something less than the original? Gregory's answer to this is just mind-bending. He writes this: the image is the same thing as the prototype, even if it is something other. Okay. What could that possibly mean?
Here's what he was getting at. Gregory argued that the Son has the exact same divine beauty, the same ousia, as the Father. So in that way, he's the same. But he's also other, because he has it differently. The Father is the source, while the Son is generated from that source. And it's precisely because he is a distinct person, and other, that he can perfectly reveal the Father, instead of just being a carbon copy.
This all connects personhood directly to the idea of a face.
You see, the Greek word for face is prosopon, but it could also mean mask. And those Sabellians, they loved that ambiguity, saying Father, Son, and Spirit were just masks. But the Cappadocians flipped it. They argued that a true face isn't a mask that hides who you are. It's the unique expression of a real person, a real hypostasis. A face, your face, reveals your unique identity.
So, let's recap. We have a single divine nature, 3 distinct persons, and the idea that a person's unique face is what reveals their existence. Now, what in the world does this super abstract theology have to do with brushes and paint? Well, it turns out everything. This whole debate accidentally created the theological justification for all of Christian art. This theological breakthrough led directly to another firestorm centuries later, the big iconoclast controversy, which all boiled down to one simple question: can you actually paint God? And the answer, based on all this new theology, was a really clever no and yes. First, the no. No, you absolutely cannot paint God's divine nature, the ousia. It's infinite, it's unlimited, it's invisible, it has no outline, no boundary you could possibly draw. The people who were against icons, they were right about that part. But, and this is the genius twist, yes, you can paint a divine person. And why is that? Because a hypostasis isn't some abstract nature. It is a specific, concrete, unique individual. A person is particular. A person has a face, a prosopon, that can be seen and can be depicted. The Greek word for to draw an outline is perigraphane. So the iconoclasts, the people who wanted to smash the icons, their whole argument was that you cannot perigraphane, you cannot draw a line around the divine. But now the defenders of icons had the perfect comeback. They said, hold on, an icon painter isn't trying to draw the infinite divine nature. They're drawing the hypostasis of Christ. They're circumscribing his unique, personal face, the very face that reveals the invisible God. And just like that, a philosophical war over 2 little Greek words not only defined this central mystery of a global faith, but it also gave birth to one of the world's richest artistic traditions. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought. This ancient struggle to define God gave the Western world one of its most powerful and lasting concepts: the idea of what it means to be a unique, unrepeatable, and infinitely valuable person.